Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tangent TV. My name is Joseph Lanzalata, and today I am lucky enough to have with us the one and only Shane Cradock. Shane, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So a bit of an intro. So Shane has over 20 years experience across 50 industries, working with high performing leaders internationally. His clients are primarily ambitious CEOs, C-level executives, and top performers hungry for growth. They include a mixture of large entrepreneurial companies such as Apple, SAP, Dell, just to name a few. There are many more. Also, a big announcement, his podcast, The Inner Edge, just hit top 10 in Ireland. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but a big congrats to you, Shane, on that. Really happy to have you.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying to you just beforehand, if you'd said to me that to be fair now, it's not top 10 in Ireland, it's top 10 in business podcasts in Ireland, right? Which is still pretty
Apologies.
good. If you said to me, listen, you get top 100, I'd be like, oh, that'd be amazing. So yeah, that was a little bit of a surprise this week because it only officially launched on Monday. But you look, it seems to be striking a chord, and yeah, you got
absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. I gave it a listen myself, and we'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. But so today, Shane, obviously, as we talked before, I brought you on because I want to kind of discuss this concept that you had shared with me of sustainable entrepreneurship. And for anybody listening now, we're talking about sustainable in the sense of sustaining yourself, sustaining the planet, and sustainable entrepreneurship. Going green is a wonderful thing. It's just not for today's podcast. But just to introduce that, Shane, the first question I want to ask you is just what is sustainable entrepreneurship, and how did you kind of come to realize the importance of it?
Okay, so I think, well, obviously sustainability is a really hot topic right now for good reasons, because more and more people are concerned about the planet and, you know, the impact that we're having as humans on this amazing home that we have and looking after it. And business has really kind of clued into that, but even still there's way more to go. So there's a massive awareness and concern. And I suppose I was just reflecting one day myself and I was thinking, well, what causes that issue? What causes pollution in our planet? What's causing that? And I don't think it's as obvious as maybe sometimes people think. So I actually think the real issue, actually, think about it, is the bigger issue than climate pollution is mental pollution. It's inner pollution. And if you think about what causes global pollution, I guess you could say, well, on one level, you can make it very, very simple and say maybe it's greed. It's just trying to kind of make as much money as we can with, you know, try and get away with stuff. And that probably was the model. We don't really care about the consequences. So you could say that's just pure greed. And now people are going to say, well, look, we need to invest in, you know, reducing our carbon footprint, bringing in technology to maybe, you know, help recycling, etc. So we kind of don't take up as many natural resources. But actually, if you think about it, greed comes from, I think, then inside someone. So how somebody sees the world, how they see themselves, how they see the planet, even what they want. Now, entrepreneurs obviously are at the center of the business world. Every corporate giant started off originally as an entrepreneurial business, and maybe over time it's very successful. You mentioned Apple there, you know, they're a corporate giant. But it started off as an idea in Steve Jobs and Mr. Wozniak's head, and then into their garage. And that's the evolution of the entrepreneurial startup into incredible force. And so for me, my experience is that I started my work really in what I call the outer game, which is the outer game of business, where you're dealing with the traditional things of how to help a company structure and scale and make profit. And then as I went along, I kind of realized more and more, initially through my own personal experience first, maybe which is always more powerful. And then I started to experiment with my clients on the inner side, the inside side. And what I realized is that if you can help somebody to become more aware of what's going on in their own inner world, and then they can experiment with that and then see themselves, not be told, but just experiment what they can see and experience themselves and kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I can see that's, for me, is real. What seems to happen is a kind of a natural intelligence that's built into every human. It kind of kicks in. Now, some people might call that their intuition, which definitely comes into entrepreneurialism. But also, everybody has it. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a funny word because sometimes, you know, people get caught up with the words. So that kind of impacts then in terms of how they see things. And actually, they kind of say very often, a lot of business people can be unbalanced and not realize even the way that they're thinking of the world is very narrow, very much on themselves, as opposed to, it's very much about me and not about we. And the future of business really has to be about we. So what I do is going to impact on people. And so the more I'm aware of myself, and sometimes realize that maybe some of my motivations are quite selfish, which isn't always the worst thing, but sometimes it can be unbalanced. And by just getting them to see themselves in a different way, you can actually settle the inner side. And when the inner side calms down, the pollution reduces. And when the pollution reduces, you don't need to convince anybody that doing something that's good for the environment and for our world, doing something for, you don't need to convince them. They just naturally see, well, that's just the way it should be. So that's why I guess I'm talking about sustainability as an entrepreneur, is that yes, it is about things like, as I think you mentioned there, burnout and energy and things like that, but there's way more to it. It's about that inner side to yourself and bringing in a degree of clarity that taps into the natural intuition that's connected to nature, that automatically just would never think of doing something to damage the environment. Does that make sense?
It does. No, I understand it. It's really interesting because it's the concepts kind of do overlap. Then it is that it's the designed towards being sustainable in the world is going to align yourself in that way. And do you think that you touched on it there, but do you think that like in the space of entrepreneurship, it's such a, like, you're so focused and like it's a naturally unbalanced line of work. So I'd imagine you've worked with a lot of people. Do you find that people who are entrepreneurs are kind of harder to pull out of that mindset, of that focus, and how have you maybe helped them to take those first steps to rebalance?
Actually, that's an interesting question. I think there's kind of a yes and no answer to that. Like, yes, on one level, they can be harder because they're down in the mines drilling, getting dirt all over their face, and it's like, you want me to what? You want me to talk to you? I haven't got time for that. So from that point of view, yeah, until the penny drops, they go, no, well, other people seem to be able to step out and look at things differently. Maybe I need to do that. And that kind of comes with experience. Sometimes, young, say 20-year-olds startup kind of generally will have the mindset of, I know better than you. So you kind of have to wait for the opening for the humility to come in at some point. And that requires letting them bang their head against a wall or hit a brick wall a few times, and then they come to say, okay, look, talk to me. What do you think you know versus me? So that's one. And then on the other side, though, you could be somebody who's in a kind of an entrepreneurial thinker in a corporate environment, which is very much possible. And you might think that they might be more open, but sometimes they can become a bit staid. The edges can dull in the mind because they're protected actually from the harshness sometimes of reality. And the entrepreneur is at the edge of the harshness usually, because there's nothing more real than waking up one morning realizing you don't have enough money to pay your team. And that will happen to most entrepreneurs. And so that's tough, but that brings out something different though, into that kind of that entrepreneurial spirit. And sometimes that only comes out through adversity. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of what's come to mind.
You are, no, and I understand it. It's like in that way, it's like you almost need to be tested in order to have those hurdles to learn from. I know from listening to a bit of your podcast that your background, you've worked in the corporate world and as an entrepreneur now, and it's like in both settings, I think there's something to get out of this in that mindset sort of shift. I mean, your mindset shifted in that way from being in the corporate world into being more of the entrepreneurial way. Do you think that being in a more corporate environment or being as an entrepreneur lends itself more or less, or is there a difference in terms of trying to have that balance, trying to be sustainable, trying to think about the world? I know for myself, just because I think like working in Trinity, it can be like a bit rigid. It's like, well, what can I really do to impact the world at large? I'm kind of just a cog in the wheel, and you can get a bit down. Is there a way of, even if you are in that job, kind of pulling yourself out of it? And on the entrepreneurial side, it's kind of the opposite. I just love your thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. There's a few, I suppose you're throwing in a few things there, but I think who you hang out with is a simple way to help that, so, everybody, even if you're an entrepreneur, can feel like, geez, is what I'm doing working? You're going to have those days. Am I making any impact here? So I think hanging out with people who are like-minded and kind of want the best for you, but also won't accept your bullshit, and their energy can almost drag you out. So who you're hanging out with, probably the easiest way to get that. So that's what I look for. I look for people who are going to stretch me, who are going to challenge me and say, hey, you know, Grant, you've had a tough one, but get on with it. I know, I think, look, I think, you know, I think people get caught up with the whole entrepreneur name, and without a doubt, you know, a pure entrepreneur is a very different animal to a corporate CEO. They just are, and they are because of their environment. They're generally going to be probably a little bit more emotional. They're probably going to be rough and ready, unpolished. The corporate CEO will generally be very polished, but the thinking in parts may be similar, the way they use their mind. And you mentioned there, like, so see, say for me, I mean, when I was in the corporate world, you know, my mindset and my approach looking back, I'd never really, nobody ever talked to me about my inner side, my mental side. And I just thought, well, I'm sure I'm the way I am. That's it. I can't really change that. That was wrong. That was a flawed assumption. And so I ended up, unfortunately, getting into unfortunately, but there was a lot of benefits to it. Ended up into kind of a depression spiral where, you know, that was about maybe for 2 years, and I got very badly depressed, suicidally depressed. And then, you know, lucky enough, got a second chance and came out of that. And then that made me look in a direction I'd never considered, which was, oh, there's a door here that says the mind or your inner world. What the hell is that about? And I walked through that door, and I'm still exploring the door. So it doesn't, I'm still exploring what's behind the door, but it doesn't mean that, well, the answer is that's far from the truth. It doesn't mean you have your days where you're kind of going, oh. But that's also part of, I think, you know, forget about the entrepreneur. Let's call it a creator. Let's call it an achiever, or let's call it maybe an alchemist. Because I think maybe certain people today, the entrepreneurial mindset is like the alchemist of old, and the alchemist of old was very much around converting base metal into gold. And what an entrepreneur is trying to do is they have an idea, and they see something that's possible, and then they try and bring that into reality. And sometimes they can do that by themselves, and sometimes they have to bring a group of people around them to say, hey, I've got this cool idea. I think we can do this and go over here. And that is alchemy, because if you think about it, like all great businesses, all great ideas, all great products, services, they start up inside your mind. And then it's about, okay, can I take that and put it into reality? And that's not easy, because on one level, you could be fighting your own thoughts saying, you can't do this, give up. And the people who kind of seem to in my experience, do the best are the ones that they still have that voice. They just take action despite that voice.
I think in that way, it's having that solid mindset, as you talked about, is that almost the precursor to trying to have the ability to bring all the people together and go forwards. A slight shift from here. I just like, the times right now are a bit different than they have been ever before. Obviously, with everybody in home with COVID around the world, is there any like reason right now that this is of kind of particular importance? This mindset, the idea of being a sustainable entrepreneur, just being sustainable in whatever you're doing.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, to be sustainable yourself implies that you're looking after yourself. You know, sustainability in the environment is looking after the environment. So it's to make sure that you can be at your best more consistently, look after yourself. So is it relevant? Yeah. Jesus, it's never been more relevant. You know, over the last month, I've been doing lots of work online with different companies, some one-to-one with leaders and entrepreneurs, and some with their teams. But who here hasn't had a moment where they're looking up the sky kind of going, why me, you know? So it's very relevant, but there's opportunity in the challenge. And see, the entrepreneurial mindset does this in any challenge. It always has a default of where's the opportunity. So the entrepreneurial mindset is, yeah, this is terrible. Can't change it though. Where's the opportunity? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm seeing right now is incredible innovation with my clients. I'm seeing incredible innovation in general. I think most of us are, you know, even in the food sector, even technology. It's incredible, because we have been forced to say, oh, I can't do what I would normally do. What can I do? And but then the other opportunity then, Joe, is I suppose the opportunity looking back that I didn't realize I was getting into in my early 20s when I had that difficult experience, was there's an opportunity to get better in yourself. And sometimes that opportunity only comes in when there is adversity, because that's when you're tested. When times are easy. I remember a mentor of mine said many years ago in my 20s, he said, Shane, when do you learn the most? Is it when times are good or when times are bad? And I'll tell you what I said, Joe, which is, I said, when times are good. And he said, oh, really? How did you figure that? And I said, well, when times are good, like my mind's clear, I'm relaxed, I can learn faster. And he said, yeah, okay, now that makes sense. He said, but you're wrong. He said, because actually what you're confusing is, you're confusing that with school learning, which is just memorization. But learning, like as in changing your behavior, he said, that only happens really when times are tough, because you find out what you're made of and you have to dig deep and maybe do things that you never thought you'd have to do. And I think what's happening right now is that most people are getting tested mentally. But the massive opportunity is, okay, good, you're feeling the pain. I can guarantee you there's a way to reduce that pain and still be in the same circumstances. That's what I learned. And actually that'll impact then at you in terms of just looking after your energy, your health, your immune system, your mind. And that's learning the skill of becoming sustainable, that you can take the hits, you can take the punches, but your longevity will stay. And what a lot of business owners and leaders, and I see this all the time, is that one of the biggest issues is burnout. They just get tired. Now, when I was in my 20s, like, what age are you, Joe?
I'm 26.
Yeah, look at you. So in my 20s, I could kind of go out, have a few drinks, go to sleep at 4 o'clock, get up at 7 and be fine, and go through, put a day's work. Can't do that now, unfortunately for me. But even still, at your age, I don't know if that's a sustainable approach if you were doing that, because I think it catches up on you. And so if you're tired, mentally tired, it affects everything. Your creativity, your communication, your clarity, all the skills you need to be a good leader, an adaptable, entrepreneurial thinker and leader.
Absolutely. I love what you said about the, like, it's almost a concept of reframing these challenges as an opportunity and seeing it as, because you're going to learn in those moments the most. If you can see that now, because I know myself, I look back and it's like, oh, those were times that were key learning points, but in the moment, you almost never think of it that way. So no. I agree completely. It's so important in that time to be able to make that perspective shift, I guess, and we can all have it now as a collective consciousness. It's so cool. So I did listen to your podcast, and I am interested in the idea of the inner edge, just because that's the title of it, obviously. I'm curious if you could just share for everybody here, what is the inner edge and how can that help us, or how does that thought apply?
I thought you were going to tell me. Well, I suppose in the way that I'm talking about it, you probably might be getting a hint of the importance that I place on the inner side of things, right? And the edge of anything is kind of where you learn, so the edge of, let's say, your comfort zone, moving into the uncomfortable zone, that edge is kind of where you're always learning. It's really only where you learn. It's kind of, you're stretching the limits of where you are or what you know. And so I just kind of thought, sure, why not try something new? And maybe just share some stories and experiences from my journey over the last 25 years of trying to help people, and just share my take on the inner side of things in the context of being of sustainable high performance. So I kind of share stories and experiences of, look, this challenge happened to me, or this situation happened to a client, and this is how we approached it, maybe from the outer side and then from the inner side. And so the edge, though, is kind of where it's just trying to help people say, okay, where's your edge? And lean into it a little bit. Because psychologically, most people, even unconsciously, I think we're honest, we often move away from the edge because it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, but actually that's really where we learn, and that's where the opportunity is actually as well. Does that make sense?
It's really interesting. I know, like, this is like, everybody is on a journey in life and we're learning as we go. And it's all of these, like, these series of things. I know for myself, and I know for a lot of people, it's like, you have to have that goal that you're aiming for. Like, okay, that's what kind of when I'm there, I did it. That's like what success is. And kind of this concept of success always comes into it, because it's like, how do I know when I'm successful? And I know you talk about it a little. I'd be curious if you could share some thoughts on, like, what are some misconceptions about success and how people may think about it.
You're asking me the easy questions today, Joe.
I try to.
How long do we have here for this one? Yeah, this is a massive one. I mean, I think, man, if you talking to me now versus, say, 10 years ago, I'll give you a very different answer, or God knows what I'd say when I was your age, like, success is a funny thing. I mean, I think I know a lot of people that have a lot of money and actually would be well known, and they don't feel successful. And I know people who maybe are not well known at all and actually are good people and good business people, and they feel successful. So successful isn't what society tells you is, because a lot of the time we can chase awards or turnover or profit or the big house or whatever. And all of those things are great. But I think if you let your self-worth be identified with your net worth, which a lot of entrepreneurs do and a lot of business people do, you're asking for trouble. Because unfortunately, say, at the time, a lot of people are mentally challenged right now. And I remember back when the crash happened in 08, 09, I was dealing with, some entrepreneurs who would have been very wealthy. And you would see it firsthand there. It's just like their fortunes literally disappeared overnight. And at that time, some people committed suicide, which was just terrible. Not anybody I knew directly, but I knew from some of my clients and friends who did. And that's where the self-worth is caught up with net worth. So when I lose it, now I've lost my sense of self. And I used to think, Joe, that the biggest issue with entrepreneurs not achieving the success that they want, I used to think it was down to a lack of cash flow or capitalization. And obviously that's key, because if you don't have cash in the business, well, that's the end of the business as such, unless you can get external funding. But still, cash is, as I say, king. But I think what's more important actually is your self-esteem and how you identify with success. So as far as I'm concerned, if I was back in being 26 like you, I'd be trying to convince you that you're already successful. I mean, look, out of X million sperm, Joe, you're the one that made it. How can you tell me, man, you're not a high achiever? You're successful. After that, it's just gravy. And it's just looking after yourself, applying your passion, your skills as best you can. Be open to the fact that you don't know everything and that you're looking to learn. And every day that you're alive is actually a win. That's the way I look at it now. So there's no reason for me not to feel successful. I am successful. I used to have it tied up in my achievements. And I don't anymore, because I realized that was making me unhappy. And all the people that I've met since has kind of proved it to me as well. So that may not be what you want to hear. It may not be what your listeners want to hear, but I think it's the truth. Mm-hmm. And weirdly, Joe, when you like, I'm a big fan, by the way, of setting myself crazy things to go after, like whether it's just doing a book or a podcast or a play or whatever else that I've done, or even stuff to do with my clients. I love going after the impossible, but I don't define myself by it, if that makes sense. And actually, weirdly, that makes it more possible to hit the impossible, which is weird.
It's when you take yourself out of it, as this is not the me achieving this is not the defining of me. It's really interesting. I think like the idea of like breaking that down is really important. I know that a lot of people who are listening, and even myself, might think though, how can I reframe my own mindset if everybody around me is focused on those things? So if I'm surrounded by a number of people who are, it's all about the money. I mean, it's what you talked about before, surrounding yourself with different people, I suppose. But do you have any thoughts on like how to break out of that mindset?
I think it's down to, you're the captain of your ship. I think like the people around you is key. So I would look at that all the time in terms of the energy, the perspective, making sure that you're not in an echo chamber. Because if you get into a community where they're all about the same thing, unconsciously you will pick up those values. That's why, as a parent, like you're always looking at your kids, kind of going, are they hanging out with the people you want, that have the same values? And that's kind of the easiest way to do it. So that'd be the simplest, I would say. And then after that, it's about you reflecting every now and again to say, okay, well, am I living my life, the way that I want to? Is it a reflection of my true values? And that is a lifetime of exploration, because it will change. Some days you go off the road, some days you go off piste, some days you drop the ball, other days you'll hit it. And I think you have to kind of go in. The entrepreneur is brilliant. Like the best entrepreneurs I know are the ones that kind of go, okay, let's just go. And we're going to make loads of mistakes. And I know by making those mistakes, we're going to figure it out. But I think it's very personal. So I think, for me, I've got my own definition of success, which is very much down to what I think is important, what I'm passionate about, the difference I want to make. And that's a good starting point to think, well, how true are you being to yourself? And only you can answer that. And then based on that answer, you might go, oh, maybe I need to change some of my friends. Maybe I need to change some of my circle. If you've been true to yourself and you feel happy and that's working for you, then keep going.
Absolutely. It's great advice. And I appreciate hearing it. I know our listeners do. I want to, just before we wrap up, I have two, I want to learn about your learnings, because I know you've done, as we've spoken before, you've done a number of different and variety of things in like your life. One, writing a book, Inspire Me, and two, writing a play as well, The Waiting Room. From those two experiences, I'm sure there are loads of learnings, but are there any like key things that you kind of took away from those that now shape how you go about things?
Yeah, they were brilliant. And I probably learned a huge amount about myself, but I also learned a lot about business, actually. Those projects helped me improve my business skill. Um, the book, first of all, what I learned was keep momentum. Because it took longer than I think it should have had for that book, Inspire Me. And really, the reason was because I think I stopped and started it. I stopped and started. And the thing about it is no, keep momentum. Keep momentum. And the same thing applies in business. Keep momentum on your key projects. Don't let it stop. Don't take your eye off the ball. Keep momentum. Even if it's slow is better than nothing, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing I would have learned, which is very much, I think the entrepreneurs one, is just because one person says no, doesn't mean that others will say no. And that was because I got a lot of no's, and then eventually you go, oh, then all of a sudden people start saying yes. And that's definitely true. And then with The Waiting Room actually was my second play, but it was my first full-length play, and that was turned into a professional production. About 3,000 people saw it in 2014 in Ireland. It's comedy. Something similar there, but actually I'll tell you something, I'll give you a different angle on it. I had that idea for 7 years, Joe. So just in case people are thinking, oh, your man is, doesn't he think he's great? No, I was procrastinating on that, right? So I had this idea, and I fell into this lie that I think we all tell ourselves: when the time is right, then I'll do that, right? And it was niggling away at me, annoying me, really actually started to bother me, but I wasn't kind of even admitting it to myself. And then I was talking to a friend one day, and she said to me, she was like, being very patient, listening to my BS. And she said, what would you say to a client? Which I hate getting that question back,
Give yourself your own advice.
Exactly. It's terrible. It's like, oh God. Then he went, okay, what would I say? I'd say just start today and keep momentum. And so in fairness to her, she said, I'll tell you what, how long do you think it would take to get it done? Now at that time when she asked me, we had 2 young kids, I think under 4. I was really busy in business, one of the busiest years of my life. And I was like, oh, she says, Shane, you got to start, man. I was like, okay. I said 6 months. Okay. She said, check in with me every Friday. Send me a little note, what you did this week, what you're going to do next week. And I was like, okay, accountability, here we go. So got to the end of that year, 6 months, had 90% of it done. Said, go to March and I'll draft, edit, got it done. And after that point, I realized, oh, I just got to keep momentum and keep pushing the milestones and the next level. What's the next target here? What's the next part of the journey? And eventually I get it done. And so that's what happened. And then a year later, we put it on in Dublin for the first time with a fully professional team. Hadn't a clue what I was doing, Joe, to be honest with you, but the people around me did. And what it allowed me to do, because my job at the moment is very much what you might call a solo practice, solopreneur type of business. I have people around me who are, I guess, freelance people, and they're brilliant. But the play was different. I think at one point we had 16 people working on it full time. They all knew what they were doing. I didn't really. My job was I got the idea, and then away we go, which is, again, the entrepreneur. And to realize, get good people around you who know better than you, and then let them get on with it. And then your job is to kind of give them guidance, keep the standards. You hold the standard of what the bar of excellence is, and that's your main job. And then support them. So I don't know if that gives you the right answer, but that's my on the fly answer to you.
No, absolutely. And there are some great lessons in there. As you said, like keep momentum, keep the right people around, like build the right team, and you can accomplish quite a bit. I think there's so much that everybody could pull out of this from today. And I really do appreciate you sharing all of your expertise with us. I know that this isn't the last time that anybody will hear about you. There are a few ways that I think they can follow up. Number one, obviously your book, Inspire Me. Number 2, the Inner Edge podcast. I've already started listening to it. People can go. And also your website, the ShaneCradock.com. Did I get all that right?
You did. Although I will tweak you on the pronunciation, but that's okay because you're North American. Shane Cradock, right? with one D, but you're fine. No, 'cause it's
Apologies.
common. No, not at all. But it's one D because very often people will spell it with two Ds. So it's
Very
one
good.
D, one D.
Shane
But
Cradock,
actually,
1D.
I explained that in the podcast because my dad has a real problem with people spelling my name with two Ds. But I just say, look, get over it. Like, get over it.
Absolutely. No, exactly. Yeah, sure. I've had a number of people try to pronounce my last name as well. It's a bit of a challenge, but
How do you say
Shane,
how do you say your surname?
Lanzalata. So,
Okay, good. Well, I got it now.
well, look, Shane, it's been about you today, and I appreciate you coming on so much. Thank you so much. And I'll look forward to speaking to you in the future. And to everybody who's watched here, thanks for joining in.
Thanks, Joey. I enjoyed it.
All right. Bye-bye for now.
See ya.